This is a panel, I believe, on religion, utopia, and violence. There's a couple of things I have to make an announcement about. You might be wondering why there's only two of us. Well, I got an email from one of the organizers of this conference, and I was told that Jeff Ewing, who was going to present on Can There Be a Continued Critique of Earth Without Critique of Heaven, a reevaluation of the Marxian critique of religion. He can't make it because of family issues. And then I got another email from Jed Murr, who's a graduate student at the University of Washington. And he was on the fence about whether or not he could come because he had an oral exam coming up on Monday. And finally I got an email from him yesterday or 2 days ago telling me that he cannot make it. So it's only the two of us.
Misplaced priorities.
I know, absolutely. Absolutely. Why miss this? So there's only two of us. And we'll use this time extensively and luxuriously. And you can ask us any question at any particular moment. But before we do that, basically the format is I'll let, this is Jason Kosnosk, University of Michigan at Flint. He's assistant professor there. And he'll be presenting on Specter and Spirit, Ernst, Bloch, and Jacques Derrida in the work of Marxist Utopia. And Jason, you told me that you were working actively with a Workers' Center in Michigan. And he's also worked in different places from New York to San Francisco, East Coast, West Coast, a very cosmopolitan guy. And
I might switch languages.
Yeah, that's French, German. This is a cosmopolitan presentation, so if I start speaking in tongue, you'll know why. But the format is basically Jason will speak up to however long you like, and we'll break into Q&A, discuss, and then I'll go into my presentation about Oscar Wilde and his essay on Soul of Man and Socialism. So, please, Jason.
Sure. Thank you. Thanks for coming. And before I get started with my paper, I wanted to, since we have so much time, I thought that I would speak briefly about sort of its genesis. And it comes from actually my own teaching. And in my introduction to political theory, I teach a political theory class. I have students read Marx. It's kind of some of the best of. I have them read the Manifesto. I have them read snippets from German ideology, from Capital, from the Civil War in France and the 18th Brumaire. And then what I like to do is I like to, since it's an introductory class, I like to juxtapose Marx and all the other dead white guys who I have them read with something contemporary. And what I have juxtaposed against Marx is a science fiction novel, a novel called Snow Crash by Neil Stephenson. I don't know if you've read it. It's pretty amazing. It's pretty funny, and it's sort of a near future. It happens maybe 20 or 30 years in the future, and it was written in the mid '80s though, so it might be happening very, very soon. Dystopian novel about a world where everything is commodified, everything is fractured, everything has undergone time-space compression, as Frederick Jameson characterizes in his Marxist postmodernism. And I just basically want to get them thinking about what the future might be and how to think about the future in a concrete and effective manner. Now, the last time I taught it, though, the students were very, very resistant. Not necessarily to Marx. Hell, it's Flint, Michigan. You can see the detritus of capitalism all around, abandoned houses, empty factories. But they were very, very resistant to the fact that I had them read a science fiction novel. That the future was something that they could even effectively think about. There was one student in particular, one of the smartest students in my class, who said, Jason, why are you having us read this? And I said exactly what I said. He said, and then he replied saying, well, but why should we can't really know what's going to happen in the future. This is a useless exercise. The future is something that is indeterminate. It will happen, and A, there's nothing we can do about it, and B, even if we could have some conception of what was happening there's no way that history would, had any logic to it, there was no connection between what happened today and what happened tomorrow. And that was quite a shock to me, especially when everybody else in the class said, yeah. And he was sort of a leading student. So I wanted to think about really, well, how can students start thinking about, and people start thinking about the future and start thinking about not just a better future, but possibly the end state of what we want, a future which is tied in with goals and values, and which is basically what I think utopia is. And so that's what brought me to these two thinkers, because even though at various points in his career, Bloch talks about his project in terms of hope, in various times he talks about utopia, and Derrida, who consciously eschews the term utopia, but he still has this not only orientation to the future, but an orientation to a better future, a value-laden future, an end state, at least in terms of values, not sort of a concrete plan, a roadmap like Thomas More in his famous Utopia might put out. So that's where I come from, and that's what inspired me to think about this. And another very interesting thing, congruence between sort of the problem of my students, because if you're teaching a teaching institution, you think about your students quite a bit, and what drew me to these thinkers was both of them ground their thinking about utopia in the everyday. And I thought this was very, very important, especially in terms of a Marxist view of utopia, because probably as many of us know, Marx and Engels were very, very critical of those who we called utopian socialists, and how there was no connection to any materiality, how there was no connection between these thinkers and any sort of trends within history, that they were merely building castles in the sky, and if there wasn't any sort of connection with any sort of materiality, any sort of base, then the exercise was not only useless, but it was ideological. It would encourage people to sort of turn it upon themselves and not do the work that was necessary to bring about social change. Now, Bloch consciously begins in thinking about the utopian with the everyday. Not with necessarily the everyday in terms of what a classical Marxist might think of work, the division of labor. He begins with the most mundane activities, fulfilling hunger, walking to the store, even seeing a cloud. And he will say that within each of these experiences and within each concrete everyday action, there is what he calls an undetermined not yet. And he'll use this phrase over and over again. Within seemingly mundane, habitual, and determined experiences. And these experiences of the not yet, which we perceive upon the fringes of our consciousness, lead us to formulate what he calls, and once again, he has many neologisms, many excellent turns of phrase, I think, little daydreams. And for example, if we are, going to the store, if we are going into the cupboard to get something to eat, to fulfill our hunger, that brings up a daydream of, possibly what it would be like to live in a world with no hunger. What would it be like to live in a world of abundance of food? What would it be like if we could determine, what our meals were, as opposed to going to the store and just having, just being presented with a counter of food which we don't produce ourselves, which we don't really have any process, we don't have any participation in creating. And this not yet and its production and its transformation into little daydreams is I don't want to say endemic, but it is a prevalent and quite frequent occurrence. Now, these little daydreams, according to Bloch, are not sufficient unto themselves to create what he will call an effective utopia, or what he thinks is the real Marxist core of utopia. That would seem to fall into the trap of the utopian socialists. They experience something, they dream it, and that turns into a goal or an end state.